The chill seeped into my bones, an icy hand gripping my chest. I woke with a gasp, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The remnants of the dream clung to me, a gruesome vignette seared into my memory. It wasn't a nightmare, not really. It was a premonition, a horrifying glimpse into a future I prayed wouldn't come to pass. In the dream, I saw myself standing in a room, the space warped and distorted like a reflection in a shattered mirror. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching long and menacing. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and imposing, their face shrouded in shadow. But there was no mistaking the glint of metal in their hand, a knife, its blade catching the dim light. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as the figure approached the bed. The victim lay sleeping, blissfully unaware of the impending doom. The knife plunged down in a swift, silent arc, and a choked gasp escaped the victim's lips. Blood bloomed, staining the sheets of vibrant crimson. I woke with a scream trapped in my throat. The image burned into my mind. The victim's lifeless eyes, wide with terror, stared back at me, accusing and haunting. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but the fear lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. A sharp buzz from my phone pierced the silence. I reached for it, my hand trembling. A news alert flashed across the screen. Unidentified body found in apartment. Murder suspected. My blood ran cold. The accompanying image showed a bedroom, eerily familiar. It was the room from my dream, the blood-soaked sheets a chilling confirmation. The victim in my premonition was dead. Panic seized me. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. The killer was out there, and the horrifying premonition had become a terrifying reality. The news report gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the gruesome reality that awaited just beyond my doorstep. The victim, a John Doe, had been discovered in an apartment complex just a few blocks from my own. The details were scant, but the chilling familiarity of the scene sent shivers down my spine. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of dread, I delved deeper into the online article. A grainy image of the crime scene flickered onto the screen, and my breath hitched. The layout of the apartment, the furniture, even the faded floral wallpaper. It was all strikingly similar to my own. A wave of nausea washed over me. Was this a coincidence? Or was I somehow connected to this murder, entangled in a web of events I couldn't comprehend? I had to know more. Ignoring the tremor in my hands, I navigated to the website of the local newspaper. The article provided a few more details. The victim had been stabbed multiple times, the time of death estimated to be sometime during the night. No suspects had been identified, and the police were appealing for witnesses. A name buried in the article caught my eye: Detective Michael Harris, the lead investigator on the case. A quick search led me to his contact information. Hesitantly, I dialed the number. Detective Harris speaking. His voice was gruff, weary. Detective Harris, my name is... I stumbled over my words, unsure how to explain the inexplicable. I think I might have information about the murder. There was a pause, a heavy silence on the other end of the line. And what information would that be, ma'am? I took a deep breath, recounting the dream, the chilling details that mirrored the crime scene. Detective Harris listened patiently, his silence punctuated by the occasional grunt. When I finished, he sighed. Ma'am, I appreciate you coming forward, but dreams aren't exactly admissible evidence. But the details, I protested. The room, the wallpaper, the way the body was positioned. Coincidences happen, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Look, I'll make a note of your call, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, a wave of frustration washing over me. Was he right? Was it all just a coincidence? But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The dream, the news report, the uncanny similarities. It all pointed to something more sinister, something I couldn't ignore. I had to find out the truth, even if it meant conducting my own investigation. My first lead was the apartment complex where the murder had taken place. I found the address online and headed out, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. The building was a nondescript brick structure, its windows dark and lifeless. A sense of unease settled over me as I approached the entrance. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet. I could hear the faint murmur of a television from one of the apartments, a jarring reminder of the violence that had unfolded within these walls. I found the victim's apartment, the door sealed with police tape. A chill ran down my spine as I peered through the gap in the tape, catching a glimpse of the blood-stained carpet. This was where it had happened, the scene of the crime, the place where my nightmare had become a reality. Determined to find answers, I began to explore the surrounding area. I spoke to the building manager, a gruff, elderly man who seemed more annoyed than concerned about the murder. He couldn't recall seeing anything unusual the night before, and he dismissed my questions about the victim with a shrug. Next, I visited the local coffee shop, a popular hangout for residents of the apartment complex. The barista, a friendly young woman with bright pink hair, remembered seeing the victim a few times. He was a quiet guy, she said, always kept to himself. She didn't know his name or anything about him. Frustration mounted. I was hitting dead ends at every turn. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a small flyer pinned to the community bulletin board. It was a missing person poster, the face staring back at me eerily familiar. The name printed below the photo sent a jolt of shock through me. It was the victim's name, the John Doe from the news report. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The missing person was my neighbor. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. My neighbor, the man whose face now haunted my every waking moment, was a victim in my premonition. The dream wasn't just a random vision. It was a chillingly accurate portrayal of his demise. A wave of guilt washed over me. Why hadn't I recognized him sooner? Why hadn't I warned him? But there was no time for self-recrimination. I had to find the killer. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned to the apartment complex, a renewed sense of purpose driving me forward. I knocked on the door of the apartment next to the victims, my heart pounding in my ears. A young woman answered, her eyes wide with surprise. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, "but I was hoping you might be able to tell me something about your neighbor." The woman hesitated, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "He was a nice guy," she said cautiously, kept to himself mostly. "I didn't know him well. Did you see anything unusual last night?" I pressed, "Anyone coming or going from his apartment?" She shook her head. "I was out with friends all night. Didn't get back until late. Another dead end. Discouraged but not defeated. I decided to try a different approach. I visited the victim's apartment again, this time managing to slip past the police tape. The air inside was thick with a metallic scent of blood, and a chill permeated the room. I carefully examined the scene, searching for any clues the police might have missed. A discarded cigarette, but lay on the floor near the window, a brand I didn't recognize. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table, its contents swirling ominously in the dim light. And then I saw it. A small, leather-bound notebook lay tucked beneath the sofa. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the worn cover. It was a diary, its pages filled with the victim's neat handwriting. I flipped through the entries, my heart pounding with anticipation. The diary chronicled the victim's daily life, his mundane routines, his hopes and fears. But as I delved deeper, a darker narrative emerged. The victim had been receiving threatening messages. Anonymous notes slipped under his door, ominous phone calls in the dead of night. He suspected someone was watching him, following him. He was terrified. And then, the final entry, scrawled in a shaky hand. "I know who you are." The words sent a shiver down my spine. The victim had known his killer. But who were they? I scanned the previous entries, searching for any clues to the killer's identity. A name jumped out at me, mentioned repeatedly throughout the diary: Alex. Alex was a co-worker, someone the victim had confided in about the threats. But their relationship had soured, and the victim suspected Alex might be behind the harassment. Could Alex be the killer? I had to find him. I searched online for Alex's contact information, finally locating a social media profile. The photo showed a man with a brooding expression and intense eyes, a stark contrast to the victim's gentle demeanor. I sent him a message, requesting a meeting. To my surprise, he agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere tense and charged. Alex was wary, his eyes darting around nervously. "I know you were friends with..." I hesitated, unsure how to refer to the victim. "With the man who was killed." Alex's expression hardened. "We were colleagues," he said coldly. "Nothing more. He mentioned you in his diary." I continued, said he confided in you about the threats he was receiving. Alex's eyes widened in surprise. "He kept a diary." "He was afraid," I said, "afraid of someone he knew." A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed Alex's face. He looked away, his jaw clenched. "I didn't kill him," he said. his voice barely a whisper. But I didn't believe him. I pressed him further, recounting the details of the dream, the chilling accuracy of the premonition. Alex's composure crumbled. He confessed. He had been harassing the victim, driven by jealousy and resentment. But he hadn't meant to kill him, he claimed. It was an accident, a moment of rage that had spiraled out of control. As Alex recounted the gruesome details of the murder, a wave of revulsion washed over me. I had found the killer, but the revelation brought little satisfaction. The truth was far more disturbing than I could have imagined. The victim had known his killer, had trusted him, and in a cruel twist of fate, my premonition had not only foretold the murder, but had also led me to the perpetrator. But the story wasn't over yet. There was one more piece of the puzzle, a final revelation that would shatter my understanding of the events and leave me questioning my own sanity. The killer, Alex, was my brother. The cafe buzzed with the murmur of conversations and the clatter of cups. But the world seemed to shrink, the sounds fading into a distant hum. All I could see was Alex, my own brother, sitting across from me, his face etched with a chilling blend of remorse and defiance. "Why?" I choked out, the word barely audible. He met my gaze, his eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. "He was in my way," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He had everything I ever wanted. A surge of anger pulsed through me, hot and consuming. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him pay for what he had done. But a cold, calculating voice whispered in the back of my mind. I had to be smart. I had to stay calm. "You know I can't let you get away with this," I said, my voice trembling but firm. A flicker of fear crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a smirk. "What are you going to do?" he challenged. "Tell the police. They won't believe you." He was right. My premonition, my connection to the victim, it all sounded like the ramblings of a delusional mind. I needed proof, something tangible to link him to the crime. "I have evidence," I bluffed. Pray my voice didn't betray my uncertainty. His eyes narrowed. "What evidence?" I reached into my bag, my fingers closing around the victim's diary. "This," I said, holding it up. "His diary. He wrote about you, about the threats." Alex's composure cracked. He lunged across the table, his hand reaching for the diary. I reacted instinctively, pulling it back just as his fingers grazed the cover. The cafe erupted in chaos. People gasped, chairs screeched against the floor, and someone shouted for security. Alex froze, his eyes darting around wildly. He knew he'd been caught. He made a desperate dash for the exit, knocking over tables and chairs in his haste. I scrambled after him, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We burst out of the cafe and onto the crowded street. Alex weaved through the throngs of people, his movements erratic and panicked. I pursued him relentlessly, my determination fueled by a burning desire for justice. The chase led us through a maze of alleyways and side streets, the city noises fading into a distant roar. I could hear Alex's ragged breathing, his footsteps echoing against the brick walls. He was tiring. Just as I was gaining on him, he stumbled and fell, his body hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. I pounced on him, pinning his arms behind his back. He struggled, his face contorted with rage, but I held on tight, my grip unwavering. "It's over, Alex," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The police were closing in. Alex went limp, his resistance fading. He knew he couldn't escape. The police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Alex was apprehended, his face a mask of defeat. As they led him away, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The ordeal was finally over. The killer had been caught, justice had been served. But the scars of the experience would remain, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. And the premonition, the chilling vision that had started it all, would forever haunt my dreams.